All right, you guys, we are here on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast with the Russian Dynamite and Russian Dynamite badass, Masha Slamovich. How are you, ma'am?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I'm really glad that you're here because ever since I met you at the NWA Empower weekend, I just had I just had it in my mind that I just had to have you on the show because I just loved your performance. So I'm just really happy that you're here.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to start by asking you, when did you fall in love with wrestling?
When I was a little kid, like pretty young,
Okay. So you were just knew like right then that that was what you wanted to do?
pretty much, I just remember watching SmackDown. I remember that that was the show. And, within like 10 minutes, I was like, yep, this is it. This is what I'm meant to do.
Okay, cool. So it was just it feels like almost like it was a love at first sight thing. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, that's pretty accurate and that's cool. So I totally get it. Like the first time you see it, it's just instant sometimes. So when did you know that you specifically like want to go after it as a career?
Then when I was a kid, I remember like all the kids around me were like, I want to be a doctor or like a firefighter. And that all just seemed so mundane and boring to me. And I just knew that wrestling was so much greater than that. And that's what I wanted to do. And plus, I would travel the world. So that was a big catch part of it.
Yeah, that's kind of like I feel like that's probably like the best part of being a part of wrestling is the fact that you get to go so many different places. So I feel like that's definitely like a cool benefit of that. You get to travel the world and beat people's faces in.
Well, that is one of, in my opinion, the best perks of wrestling. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So were there any obstacles that you have to did you that you had to face as you were becoming an athlete and as you were training to become a wrestler?
I just, put it in my mind that I was gonna do whatever it took. So I just shut my mouth and opened my eyes and my ears and I just did what I was told to do. So, it was pretty straightforward. Just put the effort in and here we are.
Okay, so who exactly trained you if you don't mind going into that?
So I was originally trained by Johnny Rods in Brooklyn, New York, in his school, The World of Unpredictable Wrestling.
Okay. So what was the greatest lesson that you learned during that time?
I that the basics are the most important things, your fundamentals. Um, like when you have that nailed down, that everything else will essentially be smooth sailing. And I guess don't think, just do. So that's something that I have always carried in my mind, and I teach to all my students too.
You know, that takes a lot of bravery to sort of push yourself, to that limit because there's so much that wrestlers do. And even with you do, like when you were performing in NWA in the Women's Invitational Cup, there was a whole lot of like high flying moves and jumping that you were doing that I thought was just so impressive. And it's just that takes a lot of bravery for anybody to be able to do, like to just because there are some people who just are afraid of heights, period. Like, and just don't want to like get high at all. But then it's just like there's people like you and so many different wrestlers who live and thrive off of high flying or like jumping off of different things. So it's just there's I feel like it takes a lot of bravery to do, and it's really clear that you have that and in like millions and billions in your soul. So that's amazing.
Well, the bravery I do have in my soul, but it is funny that you would assume that I'm not scared of heights. I hate going on the top rope. I do all of that high flying stuff in the moment. I'll just decide that I'm gonna do it and I can't get it out of my mind. I'm like, well, I've just got to do it now. So there we go.
Yeah, like I wasn't necessarily like assuming that you weren't necessarily afraid of heights, but I'm just like in my mind, it's like whenever I see any wrestler jumping or doing stuff like that, like I just wonder if they have fear or if they don't have fear. Because seemingly on the outside looking in, they'll just boom and just do it. But then in my mind, I just sort of wonder like, so were they just, did they really just think about it or did they just But yeah, it's okay though, because you're in a safe place. So
Mm.
it's okay if you're afraid of heights though. So it's cool.
It's that's another lesson that I learned at Johnny Rod's is that fear gets you hurt. So the second you start doubting yourself and fearing, that's when things go wrong. So if you're gonna do something, just commit. And like I said, don't think, just go for it. Hope for the best.
Yeah, that's a really great life lesson to have in just anything as well. So you just got to do it. So, what was I want to ask you now? One of the coolest things I did see about you during that weekend was your character. So, what was the inspiration behind that?
It's me. There is no character. It is just me being myself amplified, and I do what I want. So that's the story.
Okay. So, as you're building your fan base, like as you've been sort of, matriculating through the independents and everything, do you feel like you've sort of built a strong fan base?
I do think so. I have a very loyal fan base who always support me, and they have been supporting me for a while now. And then, of course, there's people who are joining in, of course, but there's definitely a good handful of people who I can name who've been here for at least several years on the journey with me.
Okay. So to sort of switch gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you, because since I've started my podcast and I have been talking to wrestlers, they've sort of been talking about like different ways in which the pandemic and all of the world's events has been sort of affecting their careers. So how exactly did you fight your way through that?
Well, I was lucky enough to, if you can call it lucky, I do. I got stuck in Japan because I was there on what was supposed to be a 3-month tour, and which turned into a year-long stay there. And I
Wow.
was I was honestly lucky enough to only be like out of action for about a month, and then we started doing tapings in the dojo, which we live streamed to our audience, and by July we were back in front of a live crowd at shows. So I was very lucky, but even with all of that, there was so many big events and like once in a lifetime chances for matches that got taken away from me, and it was really difficult to continuously not know if the next show was going to be there, or if everything was so uncertain at the time. So that was something that we always had to fight through, and like quarantine and things like that. So but I think everything happens for a reason, and if anything, the pandemic made people like myself and others come out of it stronger, because we never let it keep us down. We fought all the way through, and now we reap the benefits of the efforts we put in.
Yes, now that's something that I definitely am glad that I am hearing, is the fact that so many companies found and so many wrestlers found so many different ways to sort of push through and still put themselves out there, even when it comes to just their work, their character work out there, and even their businesses out there, and even with their promotions. It's like they found different ways to sort of go around the situation. So I think that that's one of the most inspiring things that has probably come out of this crazy time. It's just the fact that people have found different ways of doing things, outside of what they're used to, and it allows for people to sort of adapt to new things. So it's good to know that you were able to have those moments, in Japan where you're able to get yourself, to a good place and work hard and reap the benefits of that.
Yes, I do consider myself lucky, and like you said, so many others showed their resiliency, and that's exactly what you have to have in this business. You have to either adapt or die.
Yeah, definitely. So, who has been your favorite opponent to face so far?
I would give it, let's say, one in Japan and one in America. I'll give you the best of that. Honestly, I've had a really, really good matches with Diana Perazzo in the States, and in Japan, it would definitely have to be Chihiro Hashimoto.
Okay. So, do you have any dream opponents?
Yes, one of the matches that was unfortunately taken away from both of us actually during the pandemic. There was supposed to be myself versus Meiko Satomura, and
Oh,
that match will hopefully one day take place. I believe it will.
oh, I hope so, because she's actually one of my favorites. I love her. So I feel like,
Incredible, and
yeah.
we were both trained by Chigusa Nagayo, so it was really, there's a really awesome match waiting to happen.
Yeah, like I really hope that does happen. I'm gonna keep a lookout on your socials and stuff to see, if that ever does happen, like I want to see it. Like I will make whatever efforts I have to watch that one because that just sounds cool. So you did mention earlier that you are also a trainer yourself. So what is it like, sort of being a trainer and basically fostering the growth of other wrestlers who are just starting?
And it's one of my most favorite and rewarding experiences, especially because two of my current students were also my students in the last school that I coached at, and they followed me to the new school. So I've been training with them again since the moment I got back in January. And just to see the progress and to see, the learning, to see it all click and come together, and to see the way that wrestling inspires people and it makes people feel is really beautiful. And to know that I'm helping train the next generation of wrestlers.
Now, I'm not a teacher, but and I'm not a wrestler myself, but I'm just a fan who's sort of finding her way in sort of in the professional landscape of it all because I'm just a wrestling talker. But I know that the first time I commentated this year, and one of the most inspiring things I did see was seeing wrestlers who had just started out. And there was this one woman, her name is Kaylina Keene. She's from Buffalo, and she started out, and I believe when the event that I was commentating for, she said that was like her third match like ever. And I remember just feeling so emotional that day because I was just like, man, like there are people out here in this wrestling world that aren't necessarily like veterans. Like these are people who are there are people who are have only been wrestling for maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, or people who are really just started like maybe a year ago, and they're finding their way. And it is just the most beautiful thing because you can see their love and their passion for it, and it's just so palpable. So I know that if it felt palpable to me and I just met her that day, I can only imagine how it feels for you being a trainer and actually having a hand, in that growth.
It's really awesome, and like I said, it's rewarding. We all put the hard work in together, and I believe in being harsh and stern, but it's for your own benefit. And once you finally start getting it and it all clicks, well, then we all start reaping the benefits together. And it's one of my favorite things to see growth and evolution, and to see the light bulb go off in people's minds.
Definitely. So speaking of, it's so funny you said evolution. It's just when I think about, you and when I first saw you, which was at NWA's Empower, which is a historic event in women's wrestling and basically professional wrestling as a whole. It's just that you were there with so many great women, in the indies and also from on a really high professional level as well. And then it was produced by Mickey James and so many different, women who are just greats in this business. How did it feel to get that call, to be a part of something like that? Like, what did that feel like?
It was another really cool moment in my career because, I didn't go searching for the opportunity. And Mickey James had reached out to me about it. And I was really excited because I had wanted to work for the NWA for years, because of their history. And it's so rich and interesting. And now to be a part of that history is one of my personal greatest accomplishments, in my opinion. Um, and just being there was really incredible, and it was an emotional night, and it was just art, in my opinion.
You are just as right as you can be. Like wrestling is art. And so funny you said that because I was watching a video earlier this morning where somebody was describing wrestling as art. They were comparing weirdly enough, they were comparing hip hop music to wrestling. And he was talking about how wrestling basically is an art. And it's so cool that you said that, because I feel like a lot of people have this mindset towards it that they feel like it's either, which I think is an insult. It's like they either call it fake or they feel like it's not an art. But in my mind, I feel like, it is. So it's just, so honestly, I feel like Empower really was, a beautiful artistic, beautiful moment for women's wrestling as a whole. And just to see so many women like you and like Sahara Seven and Renee Michelle and so many different women being a part of that, and Tootie Lynn, who I had on the show a few weeks ago, be a part of something like that, just it was just a beautiful thing. And I'm so proud of all of you.
Thank you. And I do agree that it was a really it was an incredible experience to share that locker room and that stage with all of the women, like you named, Sahara Seven, Renee Michelle, and many others who were there that night. Chelsea Green, Layla Hirsch. I can go on and on.
Yeah, definitely. So, as a women's wrestler, have you ever heard, or has anybody ever brought any misconceptions or disrespect towards women's wrestling to you, and how were you able to push past that in your own career?
Well, I go out and I prove people wrong. I don't believe in these verbal arguments about, is women's wrestling good, this, that. Wonderful. Have that conversation after you watch one of my matches, because what frequently ends up happening, and I take great pride in this, is that there are people who have misconceptions about women's wrestling and even especially intergender wrestling. And they'll have watched one of my matches and they'll DM me and they'll say, you changed my mind about this. I like it now. You made it believable. Whatever you want to say, I make people like it. I make people care. I make people turn their heads to women's wrestling and to intergender wrestling. And that is one of my personal favorite things that I can bring to professional wrestling, in my opinion. And I take honor in that very much.
Yeah, that's something that I greatly respect. So, I mean, I know sometimes when it comes to even intergender wrestling, a lot of people be like, but, or they kind of just drift away from it because it might make them uncomfortable. But there are just some people, there are a lot of wrestlers women's wrestlers who feel comfortable with that and they don't care. So,
That's exactly one of my opinions, because sometimes fans will start speaking up and saying, hey, that you shouldn't have done that, or start getting into their own opinions of, oh, was it right to do that? Well, you know what, it's not your goddamn place to have an opinion on what I will be doing in a professional wrestling ring. Unless you're a wrestler, enjoy it from the other side of the guardrail.
exactly. Very strong feelings, and I appreciate that. So, if ever given the opportunity, would you sign with a mainstream company?
Well, you guys are just going to have to keep an eye on what's going on for that question to answer itself.
That's a good answer. I respect that. So, how exactly do you feel about the state of wrestling as a whole? And what do you think could be better, and what do you think is good that's happening?
First of all, I think wrestling is absolutely on fire right now. Uh, all it takes is for you to take a look at what happened at the last AEW. Uh, the kind of matches that we saw, for you to tell me a year ago or 2 years ago that that was going to be taking place, I would have told you to stop taking any drugs or taking, because that is insanity. And 2021 is completely unpredictable. I mean, there's things that we couldn't even dream of that are taking place right now. And I think going into 2022, we're just going to continue to have our minds blown by professional wrestling. Everything's intertwined, all the doors are open, and you never know what the possibilities are.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's one of the best parts about it, is like there's so much happening at a time that as a fan it sort of makes your head explode because there's just so much good stuff all around. So it's just there's always something new to see every other week, or something new like every other day sometimes. It's just an ever evolving thing this year. It's almost like, because last year everything was just so tame, it's like this year everybody was like, all right, it's time to go balls to the wall. And they did everything.
As it should be. It is it is absolutely beautiful to see this boom or renaissance or whatever you want to call it of professional wrestling and independent wrestling and all wrestling around the world. You know, you ask me what the negatives are. I can sit here and bitch and moan about things that are wrong, but why do that when we can focus on all the positives? Because the amount of good things going on in wrestling right now definitely outweigh the negatives.
Definitely, and I agree. I definitely agree with that. So, outside of wrestling, what are some of your favorite hobbies or other things that you like to do?
Well, I am definitely an avid athlete, so I enjoy running and weightlifting, but that kind of goes into training for wrestling. So I suppose my hobbies would be more training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I'm learning to play the drums. So that's what's that's what I've got my time being consumed with when it's not professional wrestling.
I wish I had time to learn how to play the drums. Like, oh my gosh. Like if I had more time to learn how to play that type of that instrument, I would be so happy.
It's really awesome. And hey man, maybe we'll see him in a band one day.
Oh, I definitely feel like you would definitely fit in a band. Like that would be really cool.
You never know what the future holds, right?
You really don't. You really don't. So, who are your top 5 wrestlers, whether they be male, female, or non-binary?
Oh, it's really hard to narrow it down to just five. I suppose we'll go with uh is this still recording? Okay, we'll go with Dynamite Kid, Chris Benoit, Misawa Mitsuharu, Kenta, and let's throw Muda in there because who doesn't love Muda?
Yeah, that's a pretty solid and diverse top 5 there. So I can appreciate that. Definitely, it's a pretty good one. So I did see that you have been featured on AEW Dark a couple of times against the likes of Hikaru Shida and Penelope Ford. What was that experience like, and how exactly did you get the call to participate in that?
Both of the times that I were there were lovely experiences. And like you said, I wrestled both Penelope Ford and Hikaru Shida respectively, which I had a great time in both of those matches. And I had wanted to work Hikaru Shida for quite some time. So I'm happy that got to take place in 2021. Um, as regards for how I got the first time for the match against Penelope Ford, I found out like 2 days in advance, and I wasn't even in my home state. I was in Philadelphia training at Cheeseburgers or see what Cheeseburger, right? I'm like, God, he changed his name. I don't know his new name. Um, I was at a school and I just saw the email and I was like, man, I gotta get home tomorrow, back to New York, and then drive all the way to Pittsburgh. But I mean, as you can see, I made it happen, right?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like even in the times where we did, speak to each other, you do make a lot of stuff happen. And it seems like you're a very wanted woman. So, and I see why. Like you're perfect. So, definitely like I was really proud that you had that opportunity on AEW Dark. And I was just really excited too because I was just like, "Oh my god, I know her." So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And I do try to keep myself quite busy and I am very work oriented. So that's how I spend most of my days is trying to continue the successful climb.
Yeah, I also saw some other news that came out. I believe it was towards the end of last week, where there was a report that maybe AEW might be adding a secondary women's title. Would that be something that you would be interested in going after in the future?
I'd be interested in going after every woman's title and every non-woman's title as well.
Okay. All right. So, what does the future hold for you, Masha?
Well, we're all going to have to find out together because I say this in every interview. If you would have asked me last year to tell you all of this stuff was going to happen, it's completely unbelievable. I would have never been able to assume that these things would take place. And for me to even have any imagination of what's going to take place in the next 12 months is quite frankly unrealistic, because whatever plans I have, wrestling may have different plans, and I just don't know where this road's going to lead. But I'm going to continue doing what I do best, which is professional wrestling, and I'm going to enjoy the journey, because sometimes the journey is more beautiful than the destination, and sometimes there's not just one destination either.
You are right about that. That is such a poignant end to an interview, because I can relate to that on a very deep level, because I never thought that I would be doing this either. Like last year, like if you had told me I'd be doing this and talking to people like you, and NWA and so many, and meeting so many amazing women in wrestling, like if you told me that like in January of last year, I would have looked at you like you're crazy. Like, come on, stop. So you do have to enjoy the journey and where it takes you, because you just never know where everything can take you. Like it can be like a crazy what if episode. You just never know. Life is fun. But thank you so much for coming on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast. So you can take this time to tell everybody where they can follow you on your social media handles and tell everybody what you got going on.
Well, you guys can all follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Masha Slamovich. And for all of my upcoming shows and exclusive releases and all the random stuff I put out, join me on my Patreon, which is also Masha Slamovich, for all of the awesome content there. And if you're interested in t-shirts, there is Pro Wrestling Tees /Masha Slamovich as well.
Thank you so much for coming on the Hardy Wrestling Podcast.